welcome. I'm Lindsay Crane, and these are my retro craft dreams. Today I have a couple of unfortunate knits that I want to deal with. It can happen to anyone. We get so accustomed to acrylics and fibers treated for machine washing that sometimes we still forget to check the label before we throw something in the washer. And what do we get for our trouble? A piece of felt. But that doesn't mean you necessarily have to chuck that knitwear into the garbage can. These two knit items would be destined for the trash, but I have an inkling that they can still have a life. So today I'm going to make bags out of these felted pieces of knitwear. First up, the sweater. That was actually a thrift store reject because it got seriously felted. It even has massive holes in both elbows, but I see a tote bag in here. So today I'm going to turn this into a new project bag. Next up, several years ago, somebody I know tried out knitting, decided it wasn't for them, and gifted me their yarn and the project that they had been practicing on, which I was going to frog and reuse the yarn. Well, the cat got a hold of it. Toby decided to wrestle on a very dirty floor with that piece of knitting. Me, being very accustomed to acrylics and novelty yarns at the time, chucked it in the wash without a second thought. But lo and behold, it was alpaca. So I have this awkward piece of knitting that was, a wavy scarf made by a novice, a very small, awkward shape of a beautiful color alpaca. It was a boucle yarn, so it's got an extra knobbly texture. It was a garter stitch. So what I'm going to try to do is turn this into a little purse. Now, I don't have patterns for either of these. I'm just gonna go with where these shapes take me. All right, let's try it. Here is my plan. I'm going to use the existing side seams, allow that to be the top of the bag. So the bottom here, I do need to sew the arms closed, and then I'm going to use the sleeves for straps. Dude, they can't see what I'm doing. Additionally, now that we've got him on here, I'm going to turn this hem. Since this hem is completely different, I'm going to turn that down and stitch it down for kind of a border. Okay, buddy, you're like really not helping. So my plan for this one, I think all I'm going to do is fold it up, I don't know, maybe to there? And then I can stitch the sides. Oh, I might have to hand sew this one. This one might not go in my machine. And then this I will cut off here and it can be a flap. So I'll have a flap here. This will probably be extra. And then I'll have a little purse like that. And I think I might even add a button. I might play around with the size. It would be nice if it can be big enough to hold my wallet. That's just too funky, so I'm gonna have to cut that off. So I have been trying to show you my plan, but the cat has his own agenda today because he has laid claim to this sweater. Haven't you? I had it sitting on the table and he just would not get off. Oh, are you going to now? Oh, you're gonna go in it. Okay. For the project bag, I started by cutting the sleeves off outside the original seam allowances so that I could continue the side seams in as straight a line as possible. While I could have sewn all new side seams, I knew that the thickness of these layers would push my machine to its limit, and I thought it best to keep the stitching to a minimum. So I decided to pick up in the middle of the original side seam with a good backstitch and take it very slowly. I sewed around the three edges using a stripe in the Fair Isle pattern as a guide for the bottom seam. There is a little wonkiness due to the original seams being stretchier than mine, but for a project bag, this didn't bother me. Plus, since there's no lining, I could easily extend the seams later. I've got my helper here, keeping my scissors warm. I cleaned up the seam allowances, trimming away some that was felted together. There he goes. Get your tail in here. I do not want to cut your tail, buddy. You are a hazard to your own health. Dude, give me 2 seconds. There you go. I'd wanted to box the bottom, but realized that would mean squeezing 4 layers under my machine, and I decided not to bother. But again, that's something I could always do later, or even by hand. He's obsessed. What do I do? You're obsessed. Next, I needed to turn the sleeves into handles. I started by opening them up next to the seam and then cut them into the largest matching rectangles I could manage, making sure to exclude the thin areas next to the elbow holes. If there had not been holes, it might have been nice to cut 2 rectangles from each sleeve and sew them end to end for longer handles, but I made do with the length that I had. I then sewed the long edges to make a tube and turned it. I had wanted to sew a seam down the center, but had the same issue with the seam allowances creating too many layers under my machine. Another option would be to needle felt it instead of a seam, but I didn't have the time or the patience for that. I did press them, but it didn't have much effect, so my handles are still quite round. Since the bottom ribbing on the sweater was so different yarn, different thickness, and even cabled, I folded it down to create a border, stitching around the bottom edge. Then it was time to add the handles. I decided how wide they should be and measured where the outside edges should hit. I realized, after all my concern about bulk, this part was going to be the most difficult. So I started by hand sewing them until I lost patience and forced some into my machine. But struggle aside, I gotta say, I really dig the carpet bag vibe this gives me. For the purse, I started by squaring off all the edges to create a nice even rectangle. I folded one end up far enough to accommodate my wallet, with the remaining part for a flap. I decided to give the flap a rounded edge and found a dish with a curve I liked to trace. Then I thought it would be really cute to add some embellishments, and I had one of my daisy knitter daisies lying around that looked perfect. After marking the bottom corner, I simply tied it on. Then I went to my needlepoint wool for some green so I could embroider a pair of simple leaves. I didn't do anything fancy here, I just did 5 straight stitches fanned out in varying lengths for each leaf. Then I knotted and secured my tails inside the felt. Then it was time to sew it up. This piece was much denser than the sweater and was never going to fit in my machine. I was going to have to sew it by hand. I wanted to use black for contrast and thought cotton would be a nice durable choice, so I chose a cheap black cotton yarn from my stash. My plan was to stitch the top opening, then I could go to the bottom corner, stitch up, around, and down the other side continuously, making sure the front and back were flat together where they needed to be joined. I figured a big blanket stitch would be quick and effective and would have a nice rustic vibe that maybe leans a bit 90s. I always get a little turned around with the first stitch on a blanket stitch, so it took a couple of tries, but after that it went together very easily and as fast as I'd hoped. I may have pulled a little too tight on the blanket stitch because I wanted to make sure nothing could get through since I was keeping them rather large. This did cause some of the stitches to get lost in the garter ridges. But this is another thing that I think I can fix later if it bothers me by just adding another layer of blanket stitch on top. And it was time to choose a button. Now these are my favorite buttons. So I'm only going to use one that I have just one of, but there should be quite a few to choose from. Maybe? No. It blends in too much. Maybe. Ooh. Oh, that one's interesting. That could be cute. What else do I have? Green one. I don't know that it works with that flower. Ooh, this one looks like a brain. Nah. White one. No. Silver. No. It's a little small. That one. That could work. Ooh. Big one. That one might be too big. Too little. I'm thinking that one. Oh, that one. No, let's not use that one. No. Thinking one of these. Let's just go with that one. Save this one for something really special. All right, we'll use that one. I figured out the button placement, made sure it was centered, and then used a pin to mark the placement and height I needed for the opening. After double checking it, I used some very sharp snips to make a vertical cut along the pin. I used the opening to mark my button placement underneath and sewed it on before finishing the buttonhole. I'm still not very good at this part. I would have used a proper buttonhole stitch for the buttonhole, but I couldn't remember how and couldn't be bothered to look it up, especially since I didn't have any buttonhole thread in the right color. So I grabbed a thinner black cotton yarn from my stash and repeated the rustic blanket stitch around the buttonhole. I thought about making a handle with a scrap of the felt, but decided on a shoulder strap instead. I have some of the original yarn, unfelted, and simply crocheted a long chain. I might felt this later to make it stronger, so for now I've simply put the ends through the purse and secured them with a bow. And with that, this purse is done. Side note, I suspect I'm not going to be able to hold projects in this very often because I think Toby wants it for himself. I think what I really made was a cat bed with handles. Oh well. There we have my 2 felted knitwear bags. How do you think they turned out? I mean, honestly, I ain't mad at that. That's actually pretty cute. There is bag number 1. Tell me what you think. I think it turned out all right. It's not perfect. And I did kind of do some crooked sewing here because my machine really didn't like it. But I got tired of hand sewing, so I kind of jammed it in there. But it can hold a lot, and I think for a project bag, it'll be just great to keep some things contained around the house. So there is bag number 1. And number 2, I think for a second chance item, keeping this out of the landfill, I think it turned out pretty cute. It's a great way to use some of your felted knit items that you're not quite ready to throw away, but you really can't do anything else with. Remember that felt is still fabric. I hope this inspired you, maybe gave you some ideas. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.
So guess who has claimed this as his bed?
He loves this. Show them how you want that. Yeah. This is why I fail as a YouTuber.
Yep, he's claimed that too. Haven't you?
Okay, seriously, I keep seeing these on the ground and thinking it's cat poop.